Hey, thanks for watching my video. If you are watching this, I hope you bought Bilstein struts for the front of your truck. These are amazing. So first thing we're going to do is loosen up, I forget what this exact part is called, but it is the little, universal bracket that holds your I'm drawing a blank right now, and I'm really sorry about that. But you're going to loosen these nuts, these 17 millimeter nuts, and then we're going to remove that top one a little bit later. Good Lord, the sway bar. It's the sway bar, but I forget what the little attachment is. I'm sorry about that. Anyway, loosen those 17 millimeter nuts, and then we're going to come over and we're going to completely remove the nut from the lower strut. And if you did buy new shocks and you're viewing this to get an idea, pretty much anything over OEM shocks are going to be better if you have a 2005 like this one is. These are the original struts that came with the truck in 2005, and the ride was terrible. So I've run Bilstein before on other vehicles, and I absolutely love them. In fact, my NISMO off-road came with the Bilsteins, and that was a great truck. So I figured I would go ahead and spend that extra $50 to $100 for the set, and I put Bilsteins on all four corners of this truck. Right now we're removing the cotter key in the upper A-arm. And plan on this job taking you at least an hour, maybe an hour and a half. It took me 2 hours to complete this whole job, but I did the strut and I replaced the wheel bearing. The wheel bearing will be a different video. So we're going to loosen the 21 millimeter nut that's on that upper A-arm, and then we're going to break it free. Typically, I'll tell you never beat on your truck with a hammer, but this is probably one of those times it'll be all right. So I give it a few taps in a couple different places, but the main place you want to tap is always going to be on the nut that's coming out of that bushing. Do not. Here it goes. It's about to go. Do not beat on the threads. Always have a nut on any kind of bolt that you're going to be beating on. That way when you take that nut off, if you did jack up any of the threads, that nut will correct them. So now that we have that nut off the upper A-arm, we need to jack the truck up until that torsion bar, that sway bar, and I believe that little rod is called a torsion rod, a torsion connector or something like that if you have to go to the parts catalog and order one. So we're going to take the 17 millimeter nut off the top of that torsion connector that's going into the torsion bar, the sway bar, and then that will allow it to come out. And then we just want to push it through and out of the way. Now we're going to finish taking off that 21 millimeter nut off the upper A-arm. And now our control arm's out of the way. So we can just, we're at a point where we can just about drop that control arm just down. So we have three 14 millimeter nuts that holds the strut onto the frame, the strut housing. So we're just going to go ahead and we're going to remove those three nuts that hold those in place. When we go to put this back together, I'm going to show you a trick, and you better heed my warning with this one. This is the third or fourth Nissan that I have put shocks on, and the trick I'm going to show you for putting them on is going to help you out immensely when it comes your turn. So here's my favorite stuff in the world. This stuff's called Freeall. My father-in-law turned me on to this about 5 years ago. It is way better than WD-40 and liquid wrench to remove rusty, dirty, grungy nuts and bolts from things. You can get it on Amazon. It's called Freeall. And no, they don't sponsor me. If you know somebody at the Freeall plant in their marketing department, send them my way, because I will sponsor them in any video I do where I have to use Freeall. That stuff is amazing. But if you're in California, don't use it, because it says on the label that Freeall will kill Californians. Or maybe you should use it. Well, that's up to you. So we've got the three nuts off the top of the strut. Now we're going to drop the entire control arm down. And then what we want to do is pull our jack out of the way, because we need to be able to push this down below the sway bar so we can get that big bolt that's on the bottom of the strut out. One time I had the idea, put that bolt in the opposite way, put the nut on the front, and that was an amazing idea, except that bolt will rub on the swing arm, so maybe not such a good idea. So now that I have the strut out of the truck, I'm going to go ahead and lift the control arm back up, and I'm going to put it on I'm going to put everything back on the upper control arm just to hold it in place. I'm not too worried about ruining that wire, that cable that goes to the wheel bearing for the ABS sensor, because like I said, I'm replacing the bearing. As soon as this struts back in, I'm going to pull that bearing off. I've already replaced the other bearings on the truck. So I just put it back into place so it holds that. If not, that wire would be pretty tight. So here is my strut, and we need to get the spring off. So the Bilsteins don't come with a spring, so you're going to reuse your OEM spring, and you need to remove this nut that's on here. You could possibly do it with an 8mm and an 8mm at the very top and an 18mm wrench, but it is so much easier to do it with an impact. And as you can hear, my air tank is just about empty. I haven't turned the air tank on today, so I was using low air pressure all day working. So there's the strut boot. We're going to throw that away, because there's a new one that comes with your Bilsteins. You want that pretty blue one. We're going to discard our old strut. And now we need to get this plastic junk off of our spring. So it's pretty brittle. Again, this is a 2005 truck. I'm going to get rid of this plastic altogether. It would be nice if I had, you know, a piece of rubber or something that I could go and put back in its place, but I don't. I'm just going to spread some marine grease on it. I did take this truck out for a ride when I was finished putting it all together, and all those squeaks and creaks and all the noises it made when I went down the road are no longer there. So that's probably the biggest benefit, better than handling, is I don't have to hear the truck going as I'm going down a bumpy road. That is now gone. So we got the plastic off. Now we're going to pull the top off and set it aside. And let's get our new strut out now. So here it is. And it comes with some hardware. So we're putting it in the vise this way because it's so much easier to use when it's straight up and down. Do not pinch your strut in the vise like you saw me take off the old one. The old one we're throwing out, so don't worry about it. So here's a hardware bag. It's pretty much the spring holder for the bottom. Drop that on. Alright, so now I'm going to take a fingerful of marine grease. This is just regular Lubrimatic marine grease. If you've seen any of my other videos, you know I love this stuff. If it's good enough to put on the bearings of your boat trailer while you run it in and out of salt water and then go down the highway at 90 miles an hour, it's going to be alright for everything else you need to grease. So this will help quiet down some of those squeaks that these springs create. And then you drop your spring down. And I did not clean up my springs because 210,000 miles, I don't really care what this truck looks like. So it'll be alright if these springs are dirty underneath the truck. You can't see them. So here's the top. This rubber bushing, you could probably replace it. I went ahead and just put a nice coat of grease inside this bushing. And right here I skipped a step, and I'll come back and show you that in a minute. Make sure that your blue Bilstein strut cover protector is on before you put the top piece on. But we don't have to worry about that. We need to compress the spring first. So it's okay if you do forget to put it on right now, but that's alright. So this is called a spring compressor. If you don't have two spring compressors, you don't need to be doing this job. I will tell you though, you could probably go to Advanced Auto or who's the other one? Yeah, anyway, the orange place that has auto parts, CarQuest. Anyway, you can go to your auto parts store. Typically, they'll have loaner tools. Spring compressor is probably one of the loaner tools that they'll have. You can buy a set of spring compressors really cheap. I bet even today they're not $50 for the pair of them. I probably paid $20 a pair back in the day when I bought these. I used to build Z cars, so that's why I have. So once you get your spring compressors on, you just start tightening them down, and you're going to do a couple cranks on one side and then flip over to the other side. And once the threads start popping through the top of that top cap, then you know you're there, and you can get your washer and everything tightened down. So this little bushing, I'm going to put a nice coat of grease on that. I'm sure when it came out of the factory there was some grease on that. And again, all these little details will keep your truck from squeaking when you go down the road. So here's the nut and the washer that goes on the top. And I'm just going to add some marine grease to that washer. And then there's the nut. Then I like to take my wrench and go ahead and tighten all this stuff down. So there we go. We're tightened down. It's in place. It looks really good. You can see the top if you don't have the impact right there. So if you don't have an impact, you can just take your 18 millimeter wrench and an 8 millimeter wrench and tighten down that big nut on the top. But it's easier to do it with an impact. So there I am taking the top off, and there's the boot that I forgot to put on. So let's put that on because we don't want anything happening to these shocks. If the original shocks could be on there for 17 years, I don't see why these Bilsteins can't be on there for 17 years. So there's a little retainer that goes on top of that. I don't think you really need the retainer. Bilstein provided it, so let's go ahead and use it. So there's my top back on. There's my nut back on. I'm going to tighten it down. I typically, when I'm doing anything like this, I tighten it down and then I put the impact. So you can hear my impact is out of air. If my air tank was full right now, I think it'd be like zip. But it did put it on, so quite impressive that it actually put it on. Alright, there it's on. So here I'm going to check it. And if you don't have an impact, this is what you'll be doing. 8 millimeter wrench on the top, 18 millimeter on the nut. And then you just want to see if you can tighten it down any. I did put some marine grease on the thread before I put that rubber cap back on. If your truck does not have that rubber cap, I'm sorry. That is an OEM part that's on the top of the OEM strut. And now I'm going to wipe some marine grease around on the top of this cap where it goes up into the strut housing on the frame just to protect it and stop any squeaks. So we just take off our tools now, and then we're ready to put our strut assembly back onto our Frontier. Alright, so this is where you need to pay close attention to me. This is the trick I told you in the beginning of the video that's going to save you a lot of time and a lot of headache. So there's really only one way that this is going to go in there. But first thing you need to do is line up those 3 top bolts in the housing, and I usually put just one 14 millimeter nut on the easy one, the stud that's easy to get to, and then I take a pry bar and I put a pry bar in the bottom of the strut. Trust me now when I tell you, afterwards you're not going to be able to do this by hand. If you don't do it now, if you don't line it up now, you're not going to be able to do it later. So go ahead and get this part lined up first. So we're good. Make sure it goes up and down. Now take that 14 millimeter nut out. Everything should be in perfect alignment at this point. So when we drop the control arm down, we get our bolt through, and we can get it through behind that sway bar, and then when we jack it back up, and you kind of have to guide this strut as you're jacking the assembly, the whole thing up, everything will line up for you. You're not going to have to fight it. So that's our goal. You know, we don't want to fight the truck getting it back together. We just want it to go back together nicely. So I'm putting a coat of marine grease on everything. That bushing up there on the upper control arm needed to be replaced. It's dry rotted and cracked. But again, this is my beater truck. It's already had a good life with 210,000 miles on it. I hope I get a few more, but we'll see. If I have to replace them later, it's easy to get to. So I tightened down those 4 14mm nuts at the top. And if you can tell, I'm going to kind of fly through the rest of it because we're 20 minutes into this video, and I know you're pretty much bored at this point. I jacked up the whole control arms assembly, and I'm lining up that torsion bar connector, and I'm going to put the 17mm nut on it right now. So at this point, I'm just putting these bigger nuts. I'm only doing them finger tight. There's not many of them. There's only 3, 4. But I want everything loose, because once this big one goes in on the control arm, and this 21mm nut is in place, then I know everything's going to be good on the front end. And then I can come back and start tightening everything down. So there's that 21mm nut. It goes on very easily. Tighten it down, get it nice and snug. It pretty much locks itself into place. And then you can you go ahead and put your cotter key in after this. That way, if that big nut ever does come loose, it's not going anywhere. You're not going to die because of this thing. Just don't forget the cotter key. That's kind of important. So there's the cotter key going in through the hole. Take a pair of vice grips, bend it out. And then now we can start going back and we can tighten up all the nuts that we just left loose. So here's the nuts, the 17mm that are on the sway bar. So we want to get those good and snug. In this truck, I'm replacing the wheel bearings at the same time that I did the struts. I went ahead and replaced the wheel bearings. So that's going to be another video. Wheel bearings for this truck range from $100 for 2 of them to $400 for 2 of them. If you've got the truck this far apart, you might as well do your wheel bearings. Maybe put a new set of rotors, some more brake pads on. It's not going to hurt anything by putting a few new parts on your Frontier if you've neglected it for a few years. Fortunately, these trucks have been made for so many years that the parts are very affordable. So this is our last nut right here, and this is on the lower strut assembly. It holds it to that lower control arm. And this job is pretty much done right now. Now we got a fresh set of Bilsteins on all 4 corners. I took it out for a ride. This truck feels great. I've got those new BF Goodrich terrain tires on it, and I'm loving it. Thanks for watching my video. If you like it, give me a thumbs up, please.